Okay, supply. This is going to actually look pretty similar to demand. And so we might go through it a little bit more quickly. But supply is essentially just the sell side sort of component, sort of equivalent of demand. And so let's just get right into it. Like we had a demand function, we're also going to have a supply function. And sort of this is, instead of being where the demand function was a relationship between price and the quantity the buyers wanted to buy, here it's the relationship between price and the quantity the seller wants to sell. Like demand, we can have a supply schedule. So here we have a table of prices of ice cream cones and the number of quantities that the seller wants to supply. So sort of remember that before demand was highest when the price of ice cream cones was 0, but here the seller doesn't want to sell any ice cream cones if the price is $0. And sort of also remember that demand was highest at $3, demand was lowest at $3, but here supply is highest at the price being $3. The other way we can see this information is through a supply curve, just like the demand curve. So here it's just a curve, and we pick either a price or a quantity and get the other one. So if we looked at, like, so for instance, let's look at the price at $1.50 a cone, we can see the supplier wants to sell wants to sell 2 cones. Okay. And so the thing to see from the supply curve is whereas demand was downward sloping, supply is actually upward sloping. And so we actually have a law of supply that says there's a direct relationship between prices and supply. If the price goes up, essentially, all it's really saying is that if the price goes up, you want to sell more. You're making more. And so, yeah. Like with demand, we had individual supply and we had market supply. And so individual supply is just all of the individual buyers and what their supply functions. And then market supply is if we just added everyone else up together. And so just to briefly do this again, we see here, let's say we have a table. Let's say we have Ben and Jerry's supply schedule. And let's just say Ben and Jerry make up the entire ice cream cone market. Well, what we see is, for example, if the price of an ice cream cone is at 0, neither Ben or Jerry wants to enter the market or wants to sell anything. And so we have a market supply of 0 cones. If the price of an ice cream cone is $3, well, Ben wants to provide 5 and Jerry wants to provide 8 cones. And so the market supply is 13 cones. And all we just do is we just sum up each row of the quantities of each seller. And so, like with demand, we can also see this in the form of the graph. So we have here is Ben's supply curve and Jerry's supply curve, and all we do is add them together and get the market supply curve. So, yeah. So basically now, that's all you need to know to describe supply at an instance, just like demand. The supply curve is the supply at a single instance in time. And what we have to do is we have to also think about the shifters to supply. So once again, just like demand, over time the supply curve is going to shift. What could change about a firm? Well, for instance, the price of labor could go up. Another thing could be just a bunch of firms close, and all of a sudden there's less suppliers in the ice cream market or whatever market. And so what we think about here is once again, it's the same as demand. An increase in supply is also called, we also say, if we increase supply, we also say the supply curve is shifting to the right. And a decrease of supply is the supply curve shifting to the left. And so let's look at that graphically. So we have the supply curves for ice cream cones. And let's say we're in the current supply curve is S1. Well, all of a sudden, the price of labor goes down. Let's say it's just so much cheaper now to produce ice cream cones that people are willing to provide more ice cream cones at the same cost as before. at the same price as before. So what we see here is that the supply curve S1, which was our old supply curve, might shift over to our supply curve S2, and supply curve shifts to the right. The other way is all of a sudden, let's say your town imposed a much higher minimum wage. If minimum wage goes up, the cost of labor goes up, and the firms might not be willing to supply as many ice cream cones. And so what might happen is that our supply curve shifts from S1 to S3, and we have a decrease in supply, or the supply curve shifts to the left. So with firms, they have other things that can shift their supplies. So input prices are a big one. So for instance, labor is a huge one. So if all of a sudden it becomes more expensive to hire people, well, then all of a sudden you're going to have increased input prices, and we'll see a decrease in supply. Another thing would be sort of intermediates needed to make your thing. So if you're thinking about ice cream, well, milk and sugar are intermediates to make ice cream. And so if all of a sudden the price of milk or the price of sugar increase, it's going to be more expensive to produce ice cream, and so supply is going to decrease. Another thing is technology. Suppose all of a sudden firms become more productive, and the key thing here is thinking about productivity. If firms became more productive, that means they can provide more ice cream more efficiently. That lowers their costs. And so if you have an advance in technology that reduces your costs, that's going to actually increase your supply. We really don't see decreases in technology because it's not like all of a sudden you forget how to do something. The only sort of decrease in technology that we would see in practice is if a company was licensing a process. So this happens a lot. Companies license processes from other companies that develop them. And if all of a sudden that license expired and you can no longer use their process, and you have to find sort of an inferior process to use. But in general, we really think of technology as going only in one direction and pushing down costs. So like with demand, we also have expectations. Let's say we're not in the market where oil is negative, but let's say that I think in a year, oil is going to be so much more expensive than it is today. So I could either sell oil today or I can hold on to it for a year. Well, I might decide to hold on to it a year if the price difference is significant enough. And the other thing is a shift is the number of sellers. If all of a sudden all these extra firms start producing something, the price of that good is going to go down. And if all of a sudden a bunch of firms close for whatever reason, the number of sellers is going to go down and supply will go down. Okay. And so now we have both demand and supply. And so together, individually, like I said, they're not sort of that useful to figure out what happens in the market, but we can combine them and talk about what happens in equilibrium.